In this video, I'm going to show you how to paint the brand new Varghulf Courtier from the Flesh Eater Court's army. A huge thank you to Games Workshop for sending this out to me for free so I could paint it for you. And who knows, we may even break some rules as we're painting this one. Let's get going. The first thing I've done is prime the model with Mechanicus Standard Grey. This is because I want to get a nice, cool flesh colour on this model. To start a build of that flesh, I'm going to take some Celestra Grey. And I'm going to dry brush it over this model, but I'm using a very soft makeup brush to do this. The benefit of using a brush like this is that it's more of an overpainting technique than a dry brushing technique to catch the edges. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to be able to really catch all that musculature, leaving the Mechanicus Standard Grey in the deepest recesses. And we want to cover the majority of the model with this Celestra Grey. Using the same brush, I haven't cleaned it, haven't washed it. I'm now going to move to Ulthuan Grey, which is a very, very bright grey colour. I'm going to do the same thing, use it as a dry brush, so clean most of it off either on a texture palette or some paper towel. I'm then going to focus on the areas that are going to catch the most light. So I'm going to leave the underbelly and things like that, but I'm very much going to focus on the arms, the legs and the head, and also down that back as well, where we haven't got any of that fur. Well, the model is looking very bright and very stark at the moment, so we need to soften the blends between those colours. And what we're going to do is take some Gryph-Charger Grey contrast paint. We're going to mix that in a 1-to-1 ratio with contrast medium. Now make sure it's very nicely mixed, and we're just going to paint this all over the miniature. It's really, really important that we don't let it cool too much in any of the recesses, because we don't want any harsh changes of colour. We just want this to tie everything together really nicely. Now, I really like these Flesh Eater Court models, and if you'd like to see a box review of the army box, then you can do so on my Patreon. Completely free, you don't have to sign up. Check the link in the description of this video, and you'll be able to watch a full review of the box as I talk through some of the pros and the cons, some of the models, how to build them, some of the issues you may face. So I think it's quite useful. I'd love for you to watch and let me know. When that's completely dry, it's time to go and start to pad out the model a little bit. So we'll do the fur first, and I'm going to use Garaghak Sewer, which is a contrast paint. Now, take your time around the edges of the fur because we don't want to spill this onto the model. One of the benefits of using contrast paint here is that you can, once it's dried, you can leave it as it is. It'll give you a really nice looking model. You don't have to worry too much about highlighting it if you don't want to. Looking at the box art, that middle bit of fur is a little bit darker than the rest of it. So once it's completely dry, all I'm going to do is go back to Garaghak Sewer and actually paint this over those areas. Now, as it dries, you'll be able to see it dries a little bit darker, and you don't have to worry too much about blending it because it's the same colour on top of itself. So it'll just look a little bit darker. That's a really nice, easy technique. Sticking with contrast paint, I'm now going to paint all of the claws using black Templar. And again, the reason for this is that once you've got it on, then it dries. It'll give you a little bit of a highlight, so you don't have to worry about using extra paint to go in and highlight it. Now, you can by all means do it if you want, but for me, this is adequate enough. Next up, we'll take some Volupous Pink. I'm going to paint this into the mouth to colour in the tongue and also the gums. And I'm also going to paint a little bit around the edge of the mouth as well. I'm not worrying too much that this is spilling over the flesh, because this is one of the rules we're going to break later. We're going to mix some layer paint and contrast paint to get an interesting highlight colour. With the Volupous Pink, I'm also going to paint inside any scars. So you've got all those kind of rips and scars along his back. You've also got lots of scar tissue. So I'm just going to paint around those as well. Now, you can see that I painted all of the fleshy membranes with Volupous Pink as well. I wanted to leave this bit in just to show you that sometimes you do make mistakes, even I make mistakes, and actually it's really easy to fix this. I decided that if I left these Volupous Pink, then the model was going to be a little bit similar in terms of its colour tone. So what I'm now going to do is take some Ionarch Skin, and I'm going to paint this all over the fleshy membranes that I already painted Volupous Pink. And this will give me a kind of a dead fleshy colour. Which I think is probably a bit more appropriate than having everything look exactly the same. Now, it did take me 2 layers to cover the Volupous Pink. Obviously, if I hadn't done it, 1 would have been fine. But I want to get some purple colour back into this, but I don't want it to be quite as strong as Volupous Pink. So the colour I'm using is Magos Purple contrast paint, and I'm just painting this over all of that membrane. You can see this is a very kind of light pale purple. So it starts to add a little bit of warmth into the fleshy membranes, which is the opposite of the nice cold skin that we've got elsewhere. When that's dry, I'm going to go back to Ionarch Skin and just paint in some texture. So essentially what I'm doing is catching the sharp edges that might be protruding and also around any rips in it. But otherwise, I'm just painting lines along the length of the membrane just to simulate some texture and to build up a little bit of colour differentiation, because this will help it stand out a little bit on the table. To finish that fleshy membrane, I'm going to take some Deepkin Flesh. I'm going to do exactly the same as I did in the last step. I'm just going to make sure that I paint the Deepkin Flesh inside the Ionarch Skin. So this will give me a really nice highlight. I'm also going to focus it towards the middle of the fleshy membranes, because again, it's just going to simulate those areas that can catch the most light. We'll paint the bone next, and I'm going to base all of this using Morghast Bone, which again is a slightly warm colour which will contrast nicely with the cold flesh. Now, there are a few bone parts, such as those protrusions from his elbows. There's also some scatter bones on the base, and there are his teeth as well. I'm going to shade the bone with some Skeleton Horde contrast paint. And the reason I'm using this, it's a little bit softer than something like Agrak's Earthshade, which is a little bit harsher and a little bit more difficult to clean up. And you can see I've actually forgotten to paint the teeth as well. So I'm going to go back and paint them with Morghast Bone and shade them with the Skeleton Horde as well. The first highlight on the bone is with Morghast Bone. So this works very nicely over the Skeleton Horde. Leave this in the deepest recesses and also any gaps between the bone meal. You can also use the shape of the model and drag the brush along the side of it. It's fairly sharp, it's a bone, so I'll give you a nice crisp highlight. We'll do the final highlight with Screaming Skull, which is a little bit brighter than the Morghast Bone. Now, Shabty Bone is a little bit too close to Morghast Bone, so it's a bit of a pointless step. The Screaming Skull, however, will stand out nicely. So we're looking for the tips of the bone, the sharpest edges that have burst through, protruding, and also don't forget to get those teeth highlighted at this stage as well. So I think that fur looks a little bit flat. I want to give it a little bit of a brightening. So the colour I'm going to use that is Baneblade Brown. Now, this is a fairly thin layer paint, but I'm going to use it with a dry brush. I'm using a very, very small dry brush for this. This is, in fact, a makeup brush yet again. So just clean off as much paint as you possibly can, and we're just going to drag it slowly along the edges of that fur, hopefully catching enough to help it stand out and just give it a little bit of a subtle highlight. You don't have to do this if you don't want to. I just think I need to let that fur pop a little bit more. Okay, it's time to highlight all of those areas that we've coloured in with Volupous Pink. So what we're going to do is we're going to get a dollop of Volupous Pink on the palette. We're then going to take 2 brush loads of Ulthuan Grey. So it's 2-to-1 Ulthuan Grey to Volupous Pink. Going to mix that up, and you've got a very, very pale pinky grey colour. This is perfect for this next step, as we're going to highlight all of those areas we've coloured in with Volupous Pink. So around the mouth, you can see why I wasn't too concerned about this, because we can just build it up really nicely and it'll blend into Ulthuan Grey behind it very nicely when we highlight that next. Similarly, for all of the scars and the heel scar tissue, we're just going to paint those raised scars, leaving the Volupous Pink in the recesses. And any deep cuts that we've got, we're going to paint the inside of those with this mix as well. We'll use pure Ulthuan Grey then to highlight the rest of the flesh. So this is a fairly easy and straightforward step. Now, Ulthuan Grey is a very thin colour anyway, so don't worry too much about adding a lot of water to it. You probably won't need to. One of the key things to do here is to focus on area highlights. So we're not worrying too much about sharp edges. We're just going to paint those big areas of muscle that are going to catch, obviously, the most light. As we work our way down to more bony areas, such as the fingers, the arms, they're all very sinewy, so it's a lot easier to catch those raised parts in this area, but we're not going to worry too much about it on the body as a whole. All that's left to do is add some yellow to the eyes. So the colour I'm using is Iyanden Yellow contrast paint. So this is a fairly easy step, just paint it over those white pupils. Now, if you do need to go in and add some white on them first, then by all means do so, but the Ulthuan Grey should be fine. Similarly, we've got all that torn flesh on his back as well, and some scars around. So we're going to paint the inside of that with the Iyanden Yellow as well. Now, take your time, but if you do make any mistakes, just fix it with the highlight colour from the previous stage. It's a very easy and straightforward step. And there we have it. This Varghulf Courtier is done. Remember, if you want to check out a full box review, then you can do so for free on my Patreon with a link in the description. If you want to know how to paint the stone on the base, then check out this video. And also, if you want to know how to paint the abhorrent Gore Warden from the same box, check out this video. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed it. Please leave a like and a comment down below, and I'll see you next time.